Hi everyone, welcome to lecture number 38, the third lecture on unemployment. In our last lecture, we discussed about the job search behavior of the workers. We discussed about the sequential job search, we discussed about the non-sequential job search, we discussed about the wage offer distribution. The wage offer distribution is nothing but the frequency distribution of potential job offers the workers they have. And also we discussed about the asking wage rate, the threshold wage that determines if the worker is unemployed, whether he accepts or rejects the incoming job offer, at what wage rate he accepts and rejects the job offer. We also discussed about the impact of unemployment insurance on the spell of unemployment, the duration of unemployment. In this lecture, we will discuss about how workers allocate their time over business cycle considering the intertemporal substitution hypothesis. And when we say intertemporal substitution hypothesis, we have already discussed about it, that workers have an incentive to allocate their time to work activities during those periods of their life cycle when the wage is high and to consume leisure when the wage is low and the leisure is cheap. So, we will discuss about that how the workers they distribute their time allocation over their life cycle when business cycle occurs. That is what we call intertemporal substitution hypothesis. We will discuss about the sectoral shift hypothesis. Sectoral shift hypothesis talks about that at any point of time some sectors of the economy may growing rapidly than others. So, we will discuss how this sectoral shock might create some kind of structural unemployment in the economy. Further, we will discuss about the efficiency wage and the unemployment. Efficiency wage is the wage which is above the competitive market wage rate. So, when the wages are higher than the competitive market wage rate, then how unemployment occurs in the economy. Further, we will discuss about the policy implications of Phillips Curve, which talks about the relationship between inflation and unemployment. So far we discussed the job search models. These job search models provide an important explanation for the existence of frictional unemployment in the economy. So, this type of unemployment is voluntary in the sense that workers invest in information so as to get higher wages in the post unemployment period. So, some of the studies have proposed that even the large increase in the unemployment observed during several economic shutdowns, which probably has a little to do with the job search activities, might have a voluntary component because of this intertemporal substitution hypothesis. So, let us try to understand this little at a deeper sense. So, in our discussion of life cycle about the labor supply, if you remember, we discussed in our labor supply module, we discussed that the workers have an incentive to allocate their time to work activities during those periods of life cycle when the wage is high and to consume leisure when the wage is low and the leisure is cheap. So, the intertemporal substitution hypothesis has important implications for how workers allocate their time over business cycle. Suppose that the real wage it fluctuates over the business cycle and that this fluctuation is pro-cyclical. Pro-cyclical means the real wage rises when the economy expands and declines when the economy contracts. So, because it is cheap to consume leisure when the real wage is low, workers are more than willing to reduce their labor supply during the recession. So, they can become unemployed and collect unemployment insurance benefits or perhaps leave the labor force altogether in order to have more leisure, because the real wage is low and as a result the leisure is cheap. So, as a result we can see a part of the unemployment observed during this economic slowdown might be voluntary, because workers are taking advantage of the decline in the real wage to consume leisure. So, the intertemporal substitution hypothesis makes two key assumptions. One is the real wage is pro-cyclical, and second is the labor supply responds to the shift in the real wage. However, if you look at this, then the question of whether real wages are sticky over the business cycle is one of the wildest question in the macroeconomics, and it has not yet been settled that whether the wages are sticky. If they are sticky, then to what extent. Although there are growing consensus that wages are indeed pro-cyclical, so we are still unsure about the strength of the correlation between the real wage and the business cycle. So, the movement of this real wage over the business cycle is difficult to calculate, because the composition of labor force changes over the cycle. So, some enter into the labor force and some exit the labor force. So, unemployment typically has a particular adverse effect on this low skilled workers. So, when we calculate this average wage of workers during an economic expansion, we use a very different sample than when we calculate the wages of the workers during recession. In other words, we can say, because the unemployment targets low skilled workers, they are less likely to be included in the calculation during the economic contraction than the economic expansion. So, the changes in the sample mix, it biases the calculation of cyclical trend in the real wage. Although it was widely believed for many years that real wages were sticky, still studies that try to correct the composition bias suggest that real wages may be pro-cyclical in nature. Further, even if the real wages are pro-cyclical, it is still doubtful that the large pool of unemployed workers during severe recession are voluntarily unemployed, which implied intertemporal substitution hypothesis. So, after all, this hypothesis assumes that the labor supply is responsive to the changes in the real wage over the business cycle. So, therefore, the evidences does not suggest that much of the unemployment which increases and during the economic slowdown can be interpreted as a rational reallocation of workers' time between work and leisure. Now, coming to the sectoral shift hypothesis. Although the job search activities can help us to understand the presence of frictional unemployment, they do not explain the existence of long term unemployment. Also, they do not explain the persistence of long term unemployment. So, as a result, a number of alternative models have been proposed to explain why structural unemployment might arise in a competitive market. One important explanation which explains the possibility that the workers who are searching for job do not have the qualification to fill the available vacancies in the market. So, it is well known that the shift in the demand do not affect all the sectors of the economy equally. However, at any point in time, some sectors of the economy are growing rapidly and other sectors are declining. Now, question is that how these structural shocks might create some kind of structural unemployment in the economy. Let us take for example, suppose the manufacturing industry, it is hit by an adverse shock. Now, because of this reduced demand for their output, manufacturers they lay off many of their workers. So, when there will be a favorable shocks, now these kind of shocks, favorable shocks can happen to the other sectors simultaneously. So, like let us say computer industry, Now, manufacturing industry has experienced an adverse shock, whereas the computer industry has experienced an favorable shock. So, in that sense, there will be an increase in the demand for labor by the computer firms. Now, if the layoff manufacturing workers have the skills that can be easily transferred across the industries, so the adverse condition in the manufacturing sector would not lead to any long term unemployment. So, workers can easily move from manufacturing sector to the computer firms. So, the layoff workers would leave the manufacturing sector and move on to the jobs in the new thriving computer industry. So, there would be frictional unemployment as the workers learned about and sampled the various job opportunities available in the computer industry. Now, manufacturing workers, however, probably have the skill that are partly specific to the manufacturing sector. So, their skills may not be very useful to the computer firms. Now, what will happen in the long run? The unemployment arises because it will take time for these workers, those who are laid off from the manufacturing sector, to acquire the skill that are required for a computer industry. So, the sectoral shift hypothesis suggests that there will be a pool of workers who are unemployed for a long spell because of the structural imbalance between the skill of unemployed workers and the skill that the employers are looking for. However, there is some disagreement about whether this sectoral shift contribute to the unemployment problem in advanced economies. The sectoral shift hypothesis implies that the unemployment rate arises when there is a lot of dispersion in the employment growth rate across the industries, which means some industries are growing and some industries are declining. So, when this dispersion is quite large, then this kind of unemployment will be high in the economy. So, while going through some of the recent literatures on this sectoral shift hypothesis, it has been observed that these sectoral shocks have an impact on stock prices, stock market prices. Now, with stock prices rising when the firms are hit by favorable shocks, and these stock prices declining when the firms are hit by adverse shocks. So, the dispersion in the change in the stock prices across the industries therefore provides an information about the importance of the sectoral shock in the economy. So, it turns out that there is also a positive correlation between the dispersion in the movement of stock prices and the unemployment rate in the economy. This is how we can explain this sectoral shift hypothesis. Now, coming to the efficiency wage and unemployment. We have already seen that when the firms find it expensive to monitor workers' output in terms of productivity, they might use efficiency wage to buy the workers' cooperation, trust. Now, because the firms pay above the market clearing wage, so the efficiency wage model generates some kind of involuntary unemployment in the economy. There are no pressure on the firms to lower the wage, because this efficiency wage is the profit maximizing wage. So, if the firm lowers the wage, the payroll savings are more than this outweighed by the productivity loss which is going to happen, because the workers may shrinking, avoid to work in a productive manner. So, let us try to understand how this efficiency wage creates some kind of involuntary unemployment in the economy. Now, if you look at this graph, on this x axis we have taken the number of employment, and the y axis we have taken the wage. Now, at a particular point of time, this labor supply curve is perfectly inelastic. So, this S, E S, this is the labor supply curve, and D is the labor demand curve. And if the economy is having a perfectly competitive market, then the wage rate is going to be decided, it is the W star wage rate. This is the market clearing wage rate based on this demand and supply, and the amount of employment will be E, which will be full employment level. There will be no unemployment. Let us say the farm cannot easily monitor the output of the workers, the productivity of the workers. So, these monitoring activities are expensive, it has some cost. Now, when we say it is a perfectly competitive market and the wage rate is W star, then we are assuming that this monitoring activities are costless. Now, we are assuming that the farms cannot easily monitor this output of the workers, productivity of the workers, and to monitor these activities there is some cost associated to that. Now, to simplify the discussion, let us assume that the workers who shriek spend all their time reading the newspaper, comics, or uselessly surfing the web, internet. So, that shrieking workers are completely unproductive. They are there in the farm, they are there in the workplace, but they are not working, they are just shrieking the job. Now, the farm therefore will want to offer a wage which encourage it to not to shriek at all. So, the farm is going to offer them a wage employment package which will gain the confidence of the workers that they will not shriek at all when they are at job. So, let us derive the wage that the farm must pay to ensure that the workers do not shriek. Suppose the unemployment rate is very high in the economy and it is then costly to shriek, because once a shrieking worker get caught, then he will be fired and he faces a long unemployment spell. So, as a result, the farm will be able to attract the workers who will not shriek even if they pay relatively low wage. So, if the unemployment rate is very low in the economy, however, shrieking workers who are caught and fired, they face only a short term unemployment spell. So, to make shrieking costly and to make them the short unemployment spell unprofitable, the farms have to offer the workers a relatively high wage. So, in that sense, we can say this non-shrieking supply curve for the workers, it will be upward sloping. Now, this non-shrieking supply curve, which gives the number of non-shrieking workers that the farm can hire at each wage rate. So, the non-shrieking supply curve states that when the farms employ few workers out of this total employed workers E, now they can attract non-shrieking workers at a low wage rate, because the layoff leads to a long and costly unemployment spell. Now, the other way, if the farm hires a large number of workers, they must pay higher wages to encourage the workers not to shrink. So, non-shrieking this supply curve for the workers will give the number of workers that the market can attract at any given wage rate and who will not shriek. Now, let us try to understand and derive the no shrieking supply curve of the workers by the farm, how it is upward sloping. So, what we discussed is that at a particular point of time in a competitive market, the demand for labor is D and the supply of labor is S, and the market clearing wage rate is W star. Now, it is costly to monitor this shrieking of the workers. So, the farm decides to pay a higher wage rate than this W star wage rate to the workers, so that they will not shriek while they are in job. Now, if the farm is going to pay a wage rate W1, which is above this wage rate W star at point F. Now, at point F, the wage difference is low because there is high unemployment in the economy. So, the workers are finding that if they get caught while shrieking, then for them the unemployment spell will be quite high. So, the firm is going to hire this much of workers, let us E1, and paying them W1 wage rate. Now, if the firm wants to hire more workers, then the firm has to operate at point G. Now, the firm has to pay E2 employ E2 workers and to pay this W2 wage rate. So, in this situation, the firm is paying a high wage rate because the short term unemployment spell, the workers are facing a short term unemployment. So, the firm is paying a little bit more higher wage rate to employ E2 amount of workers. So, therefore, the firm is paying the wage rate which will be different to the different workers to attract them and to keep on the work and not to shriek. So, therefore, this no shrinking supply curve for the labor is this, and it is upward sloping. We can denote it NS is the no shrinking supply curve. So, it is important to note that this no shrinking supply curve will never touch this perfectly inelastic supply curve at E workers, and that the difference between these two curves gives the number of workers who are unemployed. Now, if the market employs all the workers at a particular wage, a shrinking worker who gets fired can walk across the streets and get another job. In another sense, we can say that there is no penalty for the shrinking. So, the key insight provided by this efficiency wage model is clear that some unemployment is necessary to keep the employed workers in line. So, as you can see, this no shrinking supply curve should not touch this perfectly inelastic supply curve, and the difference between these two gives some amount of unemployment is there in the economy. So, the difference is showing that there is a difference in shrinking and non shrinking workers. The moment it joins this perfectly inelastic line, this non shrinking supply curve, it is just explaining that if the worker get fired, immediately he will get another job. So, there is no cost for this shrinking, and this difference between this no shrinking supply curve and the perfectly elastic supply curve is the unemployment, and it is involuntary unemployment. So, we can derive some of the properties from this equilibrium. Now, there are no market pressure forcing the efficiency wage. Now, if you look at this graph, the no shrinking supply curve intersects this demand curve, and this no shrinking supply curve decides the efficiency wage rate which is WNS, and if the firm were to pay less than this WNS, then there would be fewer workers who are willing to work, and no shrinking, they will not shrink, and being demanded by the firm in the industry, and the wage would rise. So, if the wage was higher than this efficiency wage WNS, then there would be more workers willing to work and not shrink than are being demanded. So, wage would fall. Therefore, the efficiency wage, this WNS, is above the market clearing competitive wage. Second property is that the workers do not shrink in the labor market. The efficiency wage, this WNS, is the wage that encourages this ENS employed workers to behave properly. Now, there is involuntary unemployment, the difference between E and ENS. Unemployed workers want to work at the going wage, but cannot find job. So, firms in this market, however, do not wish to employ these workers because full employment encourages these workers to shriek. Now, the structural unemployment which generates because of this efficiency wage is very different from the frictional unemployment that generated by this job search. So, search unemployment in this case becomes productive. It is an investment in the information that leads to a higher paying job, and the unemployment that is due to the efficiency wage is involuntary and unproductive. It is from the worker's point of view. So, the worker would like to have a job, but cannot find one, and further the worker has nothing to gain from being in a long spell of unemployment. So, from the firm's point of view, however, this involuntary unemployment is productive because it keeps the employed workers honest and thereby increasing the output and having more productivity. So, when we see that how this efficiency wage is determined, now efficiency wage is determined at the level NS, and the amount of worker employed is E0NS. Earlier, in a competitive environment, the wage rate was W star and the amount of employment in the economy was E. Now, we can see the this wage efficiency wage is higher than this market clearing wage rate. Now, let us say there is an economic contraction. So, there is a less demand for the workers. So, there will be the demand curve shifts from D0 to D1. Now, when there is an recession happens and there is a shift in the demand for labor, now you can see the change in the efficiency wage. The efficiency wage has moved from W0NS to W1NS, and the amount of employment is E1NS in the economy. Now, at the same time, if you look at it, had it been a situation in a competitive environment, then the wage would have been reduced from W star 0 to W star 1 had it been a situation in a competitive environment. So, we can say that the efficiency wage is little bit sticky. The change in the efficiency wage and the change in the competitive wage, you can see the change in the efficiency wage is much lower than the change in the competitive wage rate. However, it increases the unemployment. The unemployment has increased from E0NS to E1NS. Now, the unemployment is quite high. However, the wage is sticky. The relative change in the efficiency wage is lower as compared to the competitive wage rate. So, whenever there is some economic contraction happens or the economic slowdown happens, this efficiency wage creates some kind of stickiness in the slowdown or the reducing the wage rate in the labor market. So, the efficiency wage model implies that wages will be relatively sticky over the business cycle, and for example, the output demand, it falls when there is a slowdown happens in the economy. In a competitive market, the labor demand shifts down from D0 to D1, and the competitive wage rate, it has come down from W0 star to W1 star. Now, if the firm paid this efficiency wage, the same decline in the demand reduces the wage from this W0NS to W1NS. So, therefore, we can say the efficiency wage is less responsive to the change in the demand than the competitive wage. However, this employment fall, it falls from E0NS to E1NS during this contraction and unemployment rises. Now, talking about this Phillips curve. Phillips curve is a concept in the labor economics and the macroeconomics that describes the inverse relationship between the rate of unemployment and the rate of inflation in the economy. It has been named after economist A. W. Phillips, who first identified the relationship in 1958 in one of his paper. The Phillips curve has been from that point it has been a central framework for understanding the dynamics between unemployment and inflation in the economy. It has an inverse relationship between this unemployment and inflation. So, Phillips curve suggests that an inverse relationship between this unemployment rate and the inflation, and when the unemployment is low, the inflation tends to be high and vice versa. So, this relationship implies that a trade off between unemployment and inflation. So, policymakers often face a dilemma of reducing one at the cost of the other. So, if you have to reduce unemployment, then the economy will face high price. If you have to control the inflation, then economy may face a high unemployment. So, there is a trade off, and it puts the policymakers in the dilemma that which one should be taken in priority. So, we can understand this relationship with the help of the graph. Now, on the x axis we have taken unemployment rate, on the y axis we have taken the inflation rate, and let us say at a given rate of unemployment 7%, the economy is experiencing an inflation rate of 3%. Now, if some kind of policy measures has been taken to reduce this unemployment in the economy from 7 to 5, the inflation has gone up from 3 to 4%. So, economy moves from point A to point B, and economy is at point B where economy is experiencing a 5% unemployment rate with 4% inflation. So, we can see an inverse relationship between this inflation rate and unemployment rate. So, the Phillips curve implies that government could pursue expansionary policies to move to point B, where we can see that there will be a fall in the unemployment rate to 5% and the inflation can rise to 4%. Now, it depends on what the government perceives to be in the national interest. It might be then worthwhile to pursue either the fiscal policy or the monetary policy, or the fiscal policy and monetary policy together, in order to lower the unemployment rate at the cost of high rate of inflation. However, up to 70s this trade off was there, and most of the economies in the world had never experienced this twin problem of inflation and unemployment. In 1973-74 recession has and the oil crisis has created this, and the economies were experiencing this high unemployment and high inflation together. So, the inflation and unemployment experience of 70s, it was demolishing the notion of this stable Phillips curve, which was established in 1958. So, some economists began to argue that a long term trade off between this inflation and unemployment did not make any theoretical sense. So, instead of that, they argued that the economic theory implies that the long term Phillips curve must be vertical. If we can explain it differently, some economists they argue that there exists an equilibrium unemployment rate. There exists a natural rate of unemployment in the economy. So, they call it natural rate of unemployment that persists regardless of the inflation. So, economy experience some kind of natural rate of unemployment, whatever the inflation rate is. So, that could be the phenomena in the long run. Some economists they argue that no, in the short run this trade off could be there, but in the long run this relationship is vertical. So, the long run Phillips curve is vertical. Suppose the economy is in a non-inflationary long run equilibrium. Let us take the example that with a rate of unemployment 5% and the inflation is 0 at a particular point of time in the economy. Now, the unemployed workers have an asking wage rate, and that makes them to become indifferent between accepting a job and continuing their search for new jobs. So, since the economic environment is not changing over the time, we are saying that inflation is 0. So, the asking wage rate is constant. As a result, the unemployment rate is also constant at 5%, and which is a natural rate. So, given this condition, let us say the government is unexpectedly pursues a monetary policy, perhaps let us say by printing new monies that pushes the inflation rate to from 5% to 7%. So, it takes time for the unemployed workers to learn that the inflation rate has gone up, and even though the wage offer distribution shifted to the right by 7%, the workers are still ignorant about the price rise in the economy. They believe that there is no inflation, which means the workers do not adjust the asking wage rate upward to account for the unanticipated inflation. Now, because of this intervention of the monetary policy, the inflation has gone up, but the workers could not anticipate it correctly, and they are not aware of this fact that the price rise has gone up, so that they are unable to adjust their asking wage rate. So, in that case, this asking wage rate is going to be too low relative to the new level of nominal wage offers. So, workers will now encounter many job offers that might be that meet the asking wage rate, and the unemployment rate may fall. They are going to accept the offers of the nominal wage rate, the new wage rate, but with that is not their real wage rate. So, a high rate of unanticipated inflation therefore reduces the unemployment for a short period of time. Now, when the workers get realize that their real wages has gone down, definitely they will withdraw from the workforce and the unemployment will increase. So, let us try to understand this phenomena with the help of the graph. Now, on the x axis we have taken unemployment rate, on the y axis we have taken inflation. We are assuming that, let us say, economy is at a 5% unemployment rate, and the non-inflationary situation and economy is operating at point A, where the inflation is it's 0. Now, because of some kind of policy interventions, let us say it is a monetary policy which increase the money supply in the economy, as a result the inflation has gone up to 7%, and because of this expansionary monetary policy, the unemployment has reduced from 5 to 3%. Now, the workers they move from point A to point B, and they are experiencing this 7% inflation, but they are not aware of this 7% inflation, the price rise, they are unanticipated. So, their expectation about this price rise, they were not aware of that. As a result, the unemployment has reduced from 5 to 3. The moment they realize that the inflation has gone up, they will withdraw from the labor market and they will come back, the situation will come back to point C, to the natural rate of unemployment. So, this is a long run Phillips curve, where any increase in the any intervention in the fiscal policy or monetary policy may increase the inflation, but it will not reduce the unemployment rate. So, at point C, the workers now in the economy they are having 5% unemployment rate and 7% inflation. So, economy is experiencing a high unemployment and high inflation. However, for a short period of time they move from point A to point B, where they experience the economy experience less unemployment, but high inflation. So, the trade off between this inflation and unemployment exists in an inverse way in a short run, but not in the long run. In the long run, the economy operates with a natural rate of unemployment. It persists regardless of the inflation rate. So, 5% is the natural rate of unemployment in the economy regardless of whatever the inflation rate is there. So, when we talk about this short run versus long run Phillips curve, in the short run the Phillips curve indicates that policymakers can exploit the trade off between unemployment and inflation by using expansionary fiscal policy or monetary policy to lower the unemployment rate, even if it leads to high inflation. However, contractionary policies, fiscal policies and monetary policies can be used to reduce inflation rate and potentially at the cost of high unemployment. However, in the long run, the Phillips curve is often shows a vertical line, which suggesting that there is no permanent trade off between this unemployment and inflation. Instead, in the long run the economy tends to settle as its natural rate of unemployment and changes in the aggregate demand is primarily affects the price level rather than unemployment. So, the difference in the short run and long run happens because of this expectation. Expectation plays a crucial role in shaping this Phillips curve relationship. Now, if the individuals and the firms anticipate higher inflation, they may adjust their behavior accordingly and leading to a shift in the Phillips curve. For example, if the workers expect that there will be high inflation, they may demand higher wages, which can contribute to higher inflation without necessarily reducing the unemployment level. So, the individuals, the workers' expectation plays a significant role in estimating this trade off between inflation and unemployment in the economy. So, expectations could be adaptive and expectations could be rational. Let us talk about this adaptive expectation versus rational expectation. So, the original Phillips curve model was based on the assumption of adaptive expectation. Adaptive expectation is that where the individuals form their expectation of the future inflation based on their past experiences, based on the past inflation rates. They are only considering what was the trend in the past. However, the concept of rational expectation suggests that the individuals form expectation based on all available information at present, including the past trend. It also includes the current economic condition, the policymakers' action. So, the rational expectation theory implies that the policymakers may face challenges in exploiting this short run trade off between unemployment and inflation. As individuals, they adjust their expectation quickly in response to the policy changes. However, there are certain empirical evidences and the criticism about this Phillips curve. While the Phillips curve has provided valuable insight into the relationship between unemployment and inflation, the empirical evidences has shown that the relationship is not always stable and can vary across time and across the economic condition and across the different countries. So, critics of this Phillips curve argue that it may not be accurately capture the complexities of the economy. However, it is the usefulness as a policy tool. So, in that sense it may be limited, especially when we talk about the long run. So, that is the major criticism that this can be considered in a short run, but this trade off cannot be, it is not that much useful in a long run policy implications. Overall, this Phillips curve remains a fundamental concept in labor economics and macroeconomics. It provides a framework for analyzing the dynamics between unemployment and inflation and informing decisions about the economic policies and stabilizations. However, it is applicable and the application is relevance only continue to subject of the debate among the economists. Some are in favor of that, some are not in favor of that. While talking about this natural rate of unemployment, the natural rate of unemployment is known as the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, NAIRU. It refers to the level of unemployment that exists in an economy when it is operating at its potential output or full employment level. So, the natural rate of unemployment is the level of unemployment where the economy is operating at its full employment level. So, this could be a long run phenomena. It is the level of unemployment that occurs when the economy is in equilibrium and with the job openings matching with the number of unemployed workers, and the unemployment is just due to the frictional or structural factors rather than any cyclical downturn or slowdown. So, mostly this natural rate of unemployment takes into consideration the frictional and structural unemployment rather than the cyclical unemployment. So, when we talk about this natural rate of unemployment, mostly it is the full employment level in the economy. So, the natural rate of unemployment is associated with full employment, which means that all the individuals who are willing and able to work at the prevailing wage rate, they are employed. However, the full employment does not mean there will be a zero unemployment. At some level of frictional and structural unemployment is considered, and it is inevitable to any dynamic economy. This trade-off between inflation and unemployment, economists often analyze this relationship between this inflation and unemployment using this Phillips curve. So, the natural rate of unemployment plays a crucial role in this analysis as it represents the level of unemployment which consists with the stable inflation over a long period of time. So, policymakers mostly they aim to keep the unemployment close to the natural rate to avoid this accelerating inflation or deflation. While estimating this natural rate of unemployment, it is very challenging and it is very subject to uncertainty. As we can see, it can vary over time due to change in the labor market institutions, demographic conditions, technological interventions, and so on and so forth, and so many factors which influence this. So, economists use this the statistical method and models to estimate this natural rate of unemployment can differ across the countries, across the region, and over the time. So, understanding this natural rate of unemployment is essential for the policymakers and the business houses to assess the health of the labor market and formulate appropriate economic policies and make informed decision about the hiring, wages, and inflation expectations. So, in summary, we can say that the intertemporal substitution hypothesis, which argues that the huge shift in the labor supply observed over the business cycle may be the result of workers reallocation their time so as to purchase leisure when it is cheap. However, the sectoral shift hypothesis argues that the sectoral unemployment arises because the skill of the workers cannot be easily transferred across the sectors. So, the skill of workers laid off from a declining industry have to be retooled, reskilled before they can find a job in the growing industries. However, the efficiency wage theory talks that it is difficult to monitor the workers' output. Therefore, this efficiency wage is above the market clearing wage rate and it creates some kind of involuntary unemployment. So, this efficiency wage creates some kind of stickiness in the labor market in terms of wage adjustment. Further, we can summarize that a downward sloping Phillips curve can exist only in the short run. However, in the long run, there is no trade off between inflation and unemployment. There is only the inflation goes up without changing the level of unemployment. Economy experience a natural rate of unemployment in the long run. In our next lecture, we will discuss about the labor market dynamics in India. We will take all these theories and the policy implications, how Indian labor market has evolved over last 30-40 years of time. So, we will discuss about in detail the labor market dynamics in India. Thank you.